I think that's the missing piece for a lot of people is essentially we need a doctor to tell us we need a test, right?
Yes.
And in order to do that, you need to visit a doctor, and no one wants to visit a doctor. So that telehealth piece seems like it is critically important at this juncture.
Yeah, you know, what's funny is a lot of people didn't accept telemedicine, and even the industry didn't. But now with this pandemic, I think people have realized that televisits with healthcare professionals, you know, is acceptable. And for the majority of visits, it is fine. So people have accepted it. The insurance industry has accepted it. And I think it works in a way where you can launch, you know, a physician into, you know, a business. So like Josh's business can get a pool of doctors in a cost-effective manner to oversee the process by doing televisits. And so he has the ability not to have one doctor, but actually have a pool of physicians that through televisits will make a decision that he now doesn't have to make. And will help to decide if someone is clear, someone can stay at work, someone gets sick at work, who else should be, you know, contact traced, and who should be contacted. So basically, now he can have a pool of physicians deliver healthcare within his facility without actually going to the doctor's office.
I think this is a huge differential in terms of employer liability. You know, in terms of being able to say, okay, the employer does not have to make the call. The employer has a protocol that allows for a physician to make those types of calls.
Right.
Brian, how does
By the way, one last point. You know, right now, and things are changing day to day, LabCorp has an at-home test for a nasal at-home test. So now you can test people at their homes through LabCorp, where they send, you know, the actual nasal swab there, and then under televisit visualization with a doctor to make sure that they're doing it correctly, they can perform the test at home and have a result in 24 to 48 hours. So now the ability to test at home is becoming widespread. So not only can companies, you know, have their employees being taken care of by doctors by televisits, but now testing at home, other than New York right now, is now becoming widely accepted.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On the liability factor, Brian.
So I think it kind of goes in line with what we were talking about before about how do you base the decision? And really, it goes to the core of the question. Does an employer, HR director, risk manager, do they have the ability to tell someone to go get tested? You know, and at the core of that question is, physician makes a diagnosis. Traditionally, the only person who can make a diagnosis is a physician. You know, you can't be a nurse, you can't be a medical assistant. You must, by law, be a physician. So at the end of the day, you know, really what we're saying is, having a clinician make that decision. Now, I as an employer have not decided that you need to take a test. I as an employer have not decided you should stay home or you should come to work. I always have a evidence-based methodology by a board-certified expert that says this person is cleared to go to work because I've had an office visit with them. I've referred them for testing. I've got those test results back. I've gone over those test results. And now I feel confident that they can be reinserted back into the workplace. If the patient's positive, who makes that determination? You know, I feel confident that every one of the folks on this call, Josh, myself, Dr. Miller, you, Dave, can actually say, statistically, the average patient is infected, gets over the symptoms in 11.2 days on average. The literature says 14 days. That being said, a lot of that has to do also with the symptoms of the patient. So a patient might still be coughing. A patient can potentially be and can be infected for 18, 19 days. So I think that there's a clinical decision-making piece that ties into that maybe health visit that says, hey, when is it okay for that patient to go back home, and so all of those little micro decisions that are getting made are what I consider clinical decisions. So as a lawyer, I look at those decisions, and if I'm looking at liability, I'm trying to defend my small business client, I'm thinking to myself, I don't want that decision being made by the owner of my company or by the HR department. I want to put that liability on Dr. Schnurr or another board certified expert that said they were assessed by a clinician. The clinician made the decision as to when they were supposed to go back, what they were supposed to do. They're reviewing the test results, and I am following a clinician guidelines rather than me saying, well, I'm following the CDC guidelines or I'm following these guidelines. As Dr. Schnurr said, and I've observed, those guidelines are changing daily. And so the most important thing that lawyers love is things that change regularly, because at the end of the day, we can make a bunch of good arguments about what regulations you should have been following versus what you should. How up to date were you on the regulations? Well, you made that decision on this day. This information was available. So, there's just so many, I think, opportunities for plaintiffs' attorneys to bring cases against employer groups. And we all know that, as small employers, large employers, we're targets regardless. My clients have been targets, my entire practice. But at the end of the day, it's just another variation of a risk. There's a reason why we buy health insurance or we buy workers' comp insurance for our business. It's because we want to insulate ourselves from that risk of our employee getting hurt at work and understand what that cost is going to be and fix that cost. And I think employers need to look at COVID-19 the same way. Fix that cost of that risk and say, this is the cost of my risk. It's just like workers' comp. Let me manage this risk with something that's like that is going to insulate that risk. So I'm not then at the end of the day having a large liability and defense costs, even if you're doing the right thing. Let me build my evidence-based methodology by having the right protocols in place, having the right procedures in place, having someone else monitor what the newest, greatest methodology for making sure you're identifying if somebody has COVID or, I heard recently today, that they're saying the vast majority of COVID is not coming from touch surfaces, So those types of things that are coming out, daily, can lead to potentially doctors making decisions or different decisions based on how they make recommendations that I don't want my clients as someone who represents small businesses to ever make on their own.